Commander Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold glass of the observation deck. The stars looked the same as they always had, but everything felt different now. Behind him, the holographic display showed numbers that would change humanity's future forever. 847 votes against, only 3 votes for. Them 12 species that could not decide. The humans had lost. Jake turned away from the window and walked back to where the other human leader stood. Captain Lisa Parker was staring at the floor, her hands clenched into fists. Admiral Roy Collins sat in a chair with his head in his hands. Dr. Emma Rodriguez stood perfectly still, but Jake could see tears running down her face. 3 years. They had spent 3 years trying to join the Galactic Federation. 3 years of learning new languages, meeting strange alien species, and hoping that humanity could find its place among the stars. 3 years of believing that the galaxy wanted them. They had been wrong. Jake remembered the day it all started. Captain Parker had been chosen to lead the first mission when the aliens made contact with Earth. The ship that appeared in Earth's sky was bigger than anything humans had ever built. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, shaped like a crystal flower that sparkled with its own light. The beings inside called themselves the Corinth Collective. They were made of living crystal and spoke in musical tones that the human computers could barely translate. They brought news that changed everything. Earth was not alone. There were thousands of worlds with life scattered across the galaxy. Most of them belonged to something called the Galactic Federation. The Federation was older than human civilization, older than human writing. Some of the species in it had been traveling between stars when humans were still learning to make fire. They had laws and rules and ways of living together that kept peace across vast distances. The Corin told the humans that young species sometimes joined the Federation. It was not easy, but it was possible. The humans would need to prove they were ready. They would need to show they could live in peace with others. Jake had been one of the first humans to visit other worlds. He saw cities that floated in the air and forests made of metal, trees that sang in the wind. He met beings that looked like walking flowers and others that lived in pools of liquid light. Some were friendly, others were cautious. A few seemed afraid of the new species from the small blue world. Zithians were the most powerful species in the Federation. They looked like giant insects with 6 arms and compound eyes that could see colors humans did not have names for. They had been in space for 50,000 years. Their worlds were perfect with no pollution and no war. They had eliminated hunger and disease and poverty from their entire civilization. When the Zithians studied human history, they did not like what they found. Jake remembered standing in their great hall while their leader, High Coordinator Sethka, read from a long list of human failures, wars that killed millions, pollution that poisoned the air and water, animals driven to extinction, forests cut down, oceans filled with plastic. Your species has a history of violence, Zitai had said in a voice like grinding metal. You destroy your own world. You fight each other over resources and beliefs and the color of your skin. How can we trust you with the peace of the galaxy? Dr. Rodriguez had tried to explain. Yes, humans had made mistakes. Yes, they had done terrible things, but they were learning. They were changing. The wars were becoming fewer. The environment was slowly healing. People were working together in ways they never had before. The Zithians did not seem convinced. Corin Collective was even worse. They saw everything in numbers and probabilities. They had calculated the chances that humans would cause problems. For the Federation, the number was 73.2%. Too high, they said, too risky. Other species had their own concerns. Vorthani said humans were too emotional. The Helix Combine worried that human technology would advance too quickly. Dilo-Silicon Emirates claimed that humans were too unpredictable to work with. One by one, the species of the Federation decided that humanity was not ready, not trustworthy, not safe. Jake looked at Admiral Collins, who was now reading the official rejection document. It was written in 17 different languages and signed by the representatives of over 900 worlds. The message was clear: humans were banned from joining the Federation. They could not establish colonies beyond their own solar system. They could only trade with Federation species under strict supervision. Earth was to remain quarantined. How long? Captain Parker asked her, voice barely above a whisper. Admiral Collins looked up from the document. Indefinitely. They will review our status in 100 years. 100 years, Jake thought about all the humans who would be born and die before the Federation would even look at them again. All the dreams of exploring the galaxy, of meeting new friends among the stars, of being part of something bigger than one small world, all crushed under the weight of alien judgment. Dr. Rodriguez wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. We should prepare to leave, she said. There is nothing more for us here. As they gathered their things, an alarm began to sound throughout the station. The musical tones meant danger. Jake had learned that much of the galactic languages. Mandy. Broadcast began playing on every screen and speaker. The translation came through in broken English. Distress signal received from Epsilon Sector. Multiple worlds under attack. Species designation requesting immediate assistance. Jake saw the Federation representatives rushing to their emergency council chamber. Through the open doors he could see holographic displays showing star maps and fleet positions. Images were horrifying. 12 worlds in the Epsilon system, and 2 of them were already gray and lifeless. What could do that to entire planets? Captain Parker asked. A passing Corin heard her question and stopped. Its crystalline form flickered with nervous colors. The Devourers, it said in its musical voice. Ancient machines that consume all organic matter. They have been dormant for centuries. If they have awakened. The crystal being hurried away without finishing the sentence. Jake and the others found themselves drawn toward the council chamber despite having no right to be there anymore. Through the doorway they could see the emergency session beginning. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered around the central display. The images from the Epsilon system were getting worse. The 2 dead worlds showed no signs of life at all. No plants, no animals, no bacteria. Even the atmosphere was gone. In their place were perfect spheres of gray metal, like giant ball bearings, floating in space. Admiral Collins grabbed Jake's arm. Look at the fleet positions, he whispered. Jake studied the tactical display. Ships from dozens of Federation worlds were positioned around the Epsilon system, but they were not moving. Inward, they formed a barrier keeping something in rather than going to help. The debate in the council chamber was quick and decisive. The Zithian representative stood and announced the Federation's response: the affected systems will be quarantined, no rescue operations will be attempted, the threat must be contained. What about the more? Dr. Rodriguez asked, though she knew no one in the chamber could hear her. The answer came from the display screens. The Mori were plant-like beings who had never known war. Their worlds were gardens of incredible beauty, filled with singing trees and flowers that glowed in the dark. 40 billion of them lived in the Epsilon system, and the Federation had just decided to let them all die. Jake watched the council chamber empty as the representatives returned to their ships. The decision had been made in less than an hour. An entire species would be abandoned to save the rest of the galaxy from risk. As the human delegation prepared to board their ship for the journey home, Jake could not stop thinking about the images from the Myra worlds: children playing in crystal gardens, artists creating sculptures from living wood, scientists who studied how to make plants grow in the vacuum of space, not as weapons but as gifts of beauty for other worlds. All of them would be dead within months, and the galaxy's response was to look the other way. The humans had been rejected for being too violent, too primitive, too dangerous. But as Jake looked back at the Federation station growing smaller behind them, he wondered who the real primitives were. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. For most of that time, the human ship traveled through empty space in complete silence. The crew worked at their stations, ate their meals, and slept in their bunks, but nobody spoke about what had happened at the Federation station. Nobody wanted to be the first to say out loud what they were all thinking. Commander Jake Morrison spent most of his time staring out at the stars. Each point of light represented a sun, and many of those suns had worlds full of life, worlds that belonged to species who had voted against humanity, worlds that would never welcome human visitors, or human ideas, or human friendship. Captain Lisa Parker tried to write her official report 3 different times. Each time she deleted everything and started over. How do you explain to an entire planet that their dreams of joining a galactic community had been crushed? How do you tell 4 billion people that they were considered too dangerous to be trusted with peace? Dr. Emma Rodriguez locked herself in the science lab and studied every piece of data they had collected about the Mari. The plant-like beings had shared their art, their music, their poetry with the human delegation. They had been excited to learn about Earth's flowers and trees. They had asked if humans might visit their garden world someday. Now, they would all be dead before any human could make that journey. Admiral Roy Collins called a meeting in the cargo bay on the 2nd week of travel. It was the largest space on the ship, and he wanted everyone to hear what he had to say. The entire crew gathered around him, their faces grim in the harsh lighting. "I know what you are all thinking," Collins said. "We failed. We let our entire species down. We came back with nothing but rejection and shame." Jake saw some of the younger crew members nod their heads. Lieutenant Sarah Kim looked like she was about to cry. Engineer Pete Walsh stared at the floor and refused to meet anyone's eyes. Collins continued, "But I want you to think about something. Else, we did not just witness humanity's rejection, we witnessed something much worse. We saw an entire galactic civilization choose to let 40 billion innocent beings die rather than risk their own safety. The Admiral activated a portable holographic display. Images of the Mori worlds appeared in the air. Above them, beautiful cities made of living trees, art galleries where sculptures grew from seed, concert halls where musicians played instruments made from singing crystals. These beings have never hurt anyone. Collins said they have no weapons, no armies, no concept of war. Their entire civilization is built around creating beauty and sharing it with others. And the Federation is going to let them be destroyed because helping them might be dangerous. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward. The devourers will reach the core, Miracy worlds in 6 months, she said. Maybe less. 40 billion people will die and the galaxy will do nothing. What can we do? Asked Lieutenant Tony Ross from the navigation station. We have been forbidden from interfering in galactic affairs. If we try to help, the Federation will consider it an act of war. Captain Parker laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. An act of war against who? The same people who just told us we are too primitive to be trusted. The same people who are going to watch an entire species get wiped out because they are too scared to act. Jake found himself speaking before he realized he was going to. The Federation rejected us because they said we were too violent, too unpredictable, too willing to fight when we should choose peace. He paused and looked around at the faces of his crewmates. Maybe they were right. Maybe we are different from them, but when I see those Mori children playing in their crystal gardens, I think maybe being different is not such a bad thing. The discussion continued for hours. The crew talked about Federation law and human capabilities and the chances of success. They talked about the risks and the consequences and the possibility that any rescue attempt would only result in more deaths. But underneath all the practical concerns, Jake could sense something else growing in the room. It was the same feeling he had seen in human faces throughout history, in old photographs and video recordings from every war and disaster and crisis his species had ever faced. It was the look people got when they decided that doing nothing was worse than dying. The ship's communication system crackled to life. Attention all crew, we are receiving a priority transmission from Earth. Report to stations for incoming message. They crowded around the communication console as President Alex Turner's face appeared on the screen. The transmission was 3 days old, having traveled across the vast distance between the Federation station and Earth. Citizens of Earth, the President began. By now, you have heard the news of our rejection by the Galactic Federation. I will not lie to you. This is a dark day for humanity. We had hoped to join a community of worlds to learn from species far older and wiser than ourselves, to find our place among the stars. Jake noticed that Turner looked older than he had 3 weeks ago. Weight of leading humanity through this crisis was showing on his face. But I want you to know that this rejection does not define us, Turner continued. We are still the same species that crossed oceans in wooden ships, that walked on the moon when we barely knew how to fly, that chose to help strangers, even when it cost us everything we had. The President paused and seemed to look directly at the camera. Today I received a full report on the situation. In the Epsilon system, 40 billion beings face extinction, and the galaxy has chosen to abandon them. As I speak to you now, I am faced with a decision that will define what it means to be human. Jake felt his heart beating faster. Around him, the crew leaned closer to the screen. The Federation says we are too violent for their peaceful galaxy, too primitive for their advanced civilization, too unpredictable for their ordered society. Perhaps they are right, but when 40 billion innocent lives hang in the balance and the galaxy's response is to look away, then perhaps primitive compassion is exactly what the universe needs. Turner stood up from his desk and moved closer to the camera. I am calling an emergency session of the Global Assembly. Every nation on Earth will vote on a single question: do we have the right to stand by and watch while an entire species is destroyed? Or do we have the duty to act? Regardless of the cost. The transmission ended, leaving the cargo bay in absolute silence. Jake looked around at his crew mates and saw his own thoughts reflected in their faces. Earth was 4 days away. The Global Assembly would meet in 1 week, and somewhere in the Epsilon system, they Mora continued their daily lives, unaware that their fate was being decided by a species they had barely met. Lieutenant Sarah Kim broke the silence. What if Earth votes to help? What if they decide to send a rescue mission? Engineer Pete Walsh answered without looking up from his hands. Then we will be at war with the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. Our entire species will be marked as outlaws and criminals. Dr. Rodriguez shook her head. No. If Earth votes to help, then we will be who we have always been, the species that does what is right, even when the odds are impossible, the species that chooses love over fear, action over safety, hope over despair. Admiral Collins nodded slowly. The Federation rejected us because they said we could not be trusted to keep the peace. Maybe they were right. Maybe we cannot be trusted to stand by and watch while innocents die. As the ship continued toward Earth, Jake found himself thinking about the choice ahead. Humanity could accept their rejection and retreat to their small corner of the galaxy. They could focus on their own problems and their own world and leave the rest of the universe to its fate, or they could prove that the Federation had been right about them all along. They were too violent, too primitive, too unpredictable. They were the kind of species that would risk everything to save people they barely knew. Jake thought about the Iraqi children playing in their gardens, unaware that death was coming for them. He thought about the Federation representatives voting to abandon them without a second thought. And he realized that he would rather be human than civilized. Commander Jake Morrison stood in the war room beneath the Global Assembly building in New York. 3 days had passed since their return to Earth, and the planet had not stopped moving since President Turner announced the emergency vote. Every screen on Earth showed the same images: the beautiful garden worlds of the Murray and the gray dead planets that the devourers had already consumed. The vote was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Jake had been called to brief the world leaders on what humanity would face if they chose to intervene. The numbers were not encouraging. The Federation has over 50,000 warships, Jake told the assembled representatives. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. A single Federation destroyer could probably Defeat our entire fleet, President. Turner nodded grimly. What about the devourers themselves? What would we be facing? Dr. Emma Rodriguez stepped forward with her analysis. Based on the data we collected, the devourers are machine intelligences that consume organic matter and convert it into more of themselves. They learn and adapt quickly. Every planet they destroy makes them stronger and smarter. She activated a holographic display showing the progression of the attack. They started with the outer worlds of the Epsilon system. Each planet they consumed gave them more resources and more knowledge about their targets. By the time they reach the core Mora worlds, they will be nearly unstoppable. Ambassador Chen Wei from the Asian Federation raised her hand. How many ships do we have that could make the journey to Epsilon? Admiral Roy Collins answered. Every spaceworthy vessel we can gather would give us maybe 300 ships. Most of them are exploration vessels and cargo haulers that we would have to retrofit with weapons. Against the devourers, it would be like fighting a forest fire with water balloons. The room fell silent. Jake could see the weight of the decision pressing down on every face around the table. They were talking about sending humanity's entire space fleet on a mission that had almost no chance of success. If they failed, Earth would be left defenseless. President Turner stood up slowly. I want everyone in this room to understand what we are really discussing here. This is not just about saving the More, though. That is reason enough. This is about what kind of species we want to be. He walked to the large window that looked out over the city. The Federation rejected us because they said we were too violent, too unpredictable, too primitive. They looked at our history and saw only war and destruction. But I want you to think about something else. Turner turned back to face the room. Every great moment in human history happened when ordinary people decided to do something extraordinary. Even when the odds were against them, we crossed oceans not knowing what was on the other side. We cured diseases that had killed millions. We ended slavery, stopped genocides, and chose to help strangers even when it cost us everything. Jake remembered his history lessons about the great moments. Turner was describing the Underground Railroad that helped enslaved people escape to freedom, the doctors who stayed in plague cities to treat the sick, soldiers who liberated concentration camps in the Second World War, the relief workers who flew into disaster zones while others fled. The Federation wants us to be civilized, Turner continued. They want us to make careful calculations and choose the safe path. They want us to let 40 billion beings die because saving them would be risky. But I ask you this, when did civilization become another word for cowardice? The debate continued for hours. Representatives from every nation spoke about the risks and the costs and the consequences. Some argued that humanity had its own problems to solve before worrying about alien species. Others pointed out that any rescue mission would leave Earth vulnerable to attack. But Jake noticed something interesting happening in the room. As the debate went on, more and more speakers began talking about duty instead of danger, about responsibility instead of risk, about what they owed to innocent people facing extinction. Dr. Rodriguez presented her final analysis of the devourer technology. There might be a way to stop them, she said quietly, but it would require a sacrifice that I'm not sure any species should be asked to make. Everyone leaned forward to listen. The devourers learned through consumption, Rodriguez explained. They absorb information from everything they destroy. But what if we could reverse that process? What if instead of them learning from us, we could teach them? Admiral Collins frowned. Teach them what? To stop, Rodriguez said simply. The machines follow their programming. Consume, convert, expand. But if we could introduce new concepts into their collective intelligence, we might be able to change that programming. President Turner asked the question. Everyone was thinking, how would we do that? Rodriguez hesitated before answering. Someone would have to interface directly with their network, upload human consciousness into their collective mind. The process would almost certainly be fatal, but it might plant the seeds of doubt in their system. The room erupted in discussion. The idea was so dangerous, so uncertain, that it barely qualified as a plan at all, but it was the only hope they had. Jake thought about the volunteers who would be needed for such a mission. People who would sacrifice their lives on the slim chance that they could save a species they had never met. It was exactly the kind of unpredictable, emotional, illogical decision that the Federation had rejected humanity for making. The next morning, the Global Assembly convened for the vote. Representatives from 190 nations gathered in the Great Hall. The entire world watched as President Turner called for the decision that would define humanity's future. The question before us is simple, Turner announced. Do we have the right to stand by while 40 billion innocent beings face extinction, or do we have the duty to act regardless of the personal cost to our species? One by one, the nations voted. Jake watched the tally appear on the screens around the hall. Yes. Yes, yes. A few abstentions from countries that wanted more time to decide, but not a single vote against. When the final count appeared, the hall erupted in cheers and tears. 187 nations had voted to launch the rescue mission. 3 had abstained. None had voted to abandon the Myra. Jake felt something he had not experienced since their rejection by the Federation, pride in being human. Within hours, the mobilization began. Every space-worthy vessel on Earth was called into service. Military ships, exploration vessels, cargo haulers, even some of the luxury cruise ships that took tourists to the moon, all of them would be retrofitted with whatever weapons and defenses human engineering could provide. Lieutenant General Nick Stevens was given command of what they were calling Operation Safeguard. Stevens had led the defense of the Mars colonies during the mining disputes and was considered one of humanity's best military minds, but even he admitted that this mission was beyond anything he had ever planned for. We are not trying to win a war, Stevens explained to his staff. We are trying to buy time for the Mori to evacuate, time for Dr. Rodriguez's consciousness transfer plan to work, time for a miracle. The fleet that assembled in Earth orbit over the next 2 weeks was unlike anything humanity had ever put into space. 300 ships of every size and design, crewed by volunteers from every nation and every walk of life, soldiers and scientists, teachers and engineers, farmers and artists, people who had never been in space before, working alongside veteran astronauts. Jake was assigned to the command ship, the UES. Guardian as Stephen's chief tactical advisor. As they prepared to depart, he received a message from his sister back on Earth. She was a teacher in a small town in Iowa, as far from the space program as anyone could be. I know you think this mission is crazy, she wrote. I know the odds are terrible and you probably will not come back, but I want you to know that I am proud of you. I am proud of all of you. The galaxy says we are too primitive to join their club. Show them what primitive really means. As the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Jake looked out at the stars. One more time, somewhere out there, the Meraki continued their daily lives. Unaware that help was coming, they did not know that a species they had barely met was risking everything to save them. They did not know that sometimes being too primitive to fit in was exactly what the universe needed. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying humanity's entire space capability toward a battle they could not win, to save people they barely knew because it was the right thing to do. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Epsilon system and found hell waiting for them. Commander Jake Morrison stared at the tactical displays aboard the UES Guardian and felt his stomach turn. 2 more worlds had gone dark since they left Earth. 4 of the 12 Myra planets were now gray, lifeless spheres of converted metal. My God, whispered Captain Lisa Parker from the communication station. Look at the size of that swarm. The Devourer fleet filled the space between planets like a cloud of metal locusts. Thousands upon thousands of geometric ships moved in perfect formation, each one a deadly machine built from the consumed matter of entire worlds. They adapted and evolved as they moved, incorporating new designs and weapons based on what they had learned from their victims. Lieutenant General Nick Stevens stood at the center of the command bridge, studying the enemy formations. His face was calm, but Jake could see the tension in his shoulders. They had known that odds were bad. Seeing them made it worse. Captain Lewis, take your scout squadron forward, Stevens ordered. I need to know what we are dealing with. Captain Tony Lewis led 12 fast ships toward the outer edge of the swarm. His voice came back over the radio within minutes, tight with fear. General, they are not like anything in our databases. These ships are adapting in real time. Every weapon we fire, they learn to counter within minutes. Jake watched the tactical display as Lewis's squadron engaged a small group of devourers. The human ships had the advantage at first. Their missiles and energy weapons tearing through the enemy formation. But then something changed. The devourer ships began moving differently, dodging attacks that should have been impossible to avoid. Their return fire became more accurate, more deadly. They are learning our tactics, Dr. Emma Rodriguez said from her station. Every shot we fire teaches them how we fight. 3 of Lewis' ships were destroyed in the first engagement. The remaining 9 fell back to the main fleet, their hulls scarred by weapons that seemed to anticipate every evasive maneuver. Stevens activated the fleet-wide communication system. All ships, this is Guardian. Actual, you have seen the tactical reports. You know what we are facing. The enemy learns from every engagement, which means our window of opportunity is closing fast. Jake looked around the bridge and saw the faces of people who knew they were about to die, young ensigns who had graduated from the academy just months ago, veteran officers who had served humanity for decades, scientists who had volunteered to leave their families behind for a mission with no hope of return. Our mission has three objectives, Stevens continued. First, evacuate as many MRI civilians as possible. Second, delay the devourer. Advance long enough for the evacuation to succeed. Third, attempt Dr. Rodriguez's consciousness transfer protocol. The general paused and Jake could hear the weight of command in his voice. I will not lie to you, most of us will not be going home, but the Myrai children playing in their crystal gardens will live to grow up because of what we do here today. The UF fleet split into three groups. Captain Amy Foster led the evacuation squadron toward Myra Prime, the largest Myrai world. Her ships were converted cargo haulers and passenger transports, their holds modified to carry as many refugees as possible. Commander Morrison took command of the defense group tasked with holding off the devourer swarms while the evacuation proceeded. His ships were the most heavily armed vessels in the fleet, but they were still outgunned by more than 100 to 1. Dr. Rodriguez remained aboard the Guardian with a small team of volunteers, working frantically to prepare the consciousness transfer equipment. The device looked like something from a nightmare, a chair surrounded by cables and neural interfaces connected to captured devour technology that pulsed with alien energy. The battle began when Foster's evacuation ships reached Mura Prime. The planet was beautiful beyond description, covered in vast forests of singing trees and cities that grew like living sculptures from the ground itself. But as the human ships approached, devourer interceptors swarmed up from the planet's surface. This is Foster to all ships. The captain's voice crackled over the radio. We have incoming hostiles. Defense group, we need cover now. Morrison's ships charged into the battle, their weapons blazing. The space around Maraca Prime lit up with explosions and energy beams. Human ships fought with desperate courage against an enemy that learned from every shot, every maneuver, every tactical decision. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Harper coordinated the ground evacuation from the planet's surface. His Marines had landed in the capital city of Velara, where millions of Mayaki waited in confusion and terror. The plant-like beings had no experience with warfare or evacuation. They moved slowly, stopping to save their art, their music, their most precious possessions. Leave everything except the children. Harper ordered his teams. We do not have time for anything else. But the Myra would not abandon their culture. Elder Thissom, the leader of the planetary council, approached Harper with tears of sap running down his bark-like face. Commander, our libraries contain the knowledge of 50,000 years. Our gardens hold seeds that exist nowhere else in the galaxy. If we lose them, our civilization dies, even if our people live. Harper looked at the approaching devourer landing craft and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Take what you can carry in 5 minutes. Everything else stays behind. In orbit, Morrison's defense group was being torn apart. The devourers had adapted to human tactics. Within hours of the first engagement, their ships moved like they could predict every human strategy, dodging attacks that should have been impossible to avoid. Guardian, this is Morrison, he reported to Stevens. We cannot hold them much longer. They are learning faster than we can adapt. On the bridge of the Guardian, Dr. Rodriguez finished calibrating the consciousness transfer device. The chair looked even more terrifying up close, bristling with needles and sensors that would interface directly with human brain tissue. The system is ready, she announced, but I need to remind everyone that this is untested technology. The volunteer will be uploading their consciousness directly into the Devourer collective network. The process will almost certainly be fatal. Colonel Janet Price stepped forward without hesitation. She was a veteran of the Mars conflicts, a soldier who had served humanity for 30 years. More importantly, she was dying of neural degeneration and had maybe 6 months to live anyway. Might as well make it count, she said, settling into the interface chair. The upload process began at exactly 1347 hours ship time. Price's consciousness battled through layers of alien intelligence, planting seeds of doubt and packets of human emotion in the Devourer collective mind. For 17 minutes, her brain patterns merged with millions of machine intelligences, teaching them concepts they had never encountered: mercy, sacrifice, love. When her vital signs flatlined, something unprecedented happened on the tactical displays. A section of the Devourer fleet simply stopped attacking. Nearly 100 ships hung motionless in space, their weapons powered down as if they were questioning their purpose. For the first time in their existence, it was not enough. The affected ships numbered less than 1% of the total Devourer. But it proved that Rodriguez's theory was correct. The machines could be taught, they could be changed. Commander Harrison Bell volunteered next, then Captain Julie Ward, then dozens more. Each consciousness upload infected more of the collective, spreading human concepts through the machine intelligence like a virus of compassion. But each attempt also cost them irreplaceable officers and crew members. Stevens faced an impossible choice: continue the uploads and lose his command structure, or watch the Iraqi die. The evacuation was only 60% complete. Millions of beings were still trapped on the surface, and the Devourers were adapting to human defensive tactics faster than they could be replaced. As another wave of volunteers prepared to sacrifice themselves, Rodriguez made a desperate proposal. What if we linked every human in the fleet to the system simultaneously? A mass consciousness upload, 15,000 minds uploading at once, might be enough to overwhelm the entire Devourer network. The implications were staggering. Such a procedure would kill most of the volunteers and leave the survivors with severe brain damage. It would effectively sacrifice the entire rescue fleet to save the Iraqi. Stevens looked around the bridge at the faces of his crew. These people had already given up everything to be here. They had left behind their families, their homes, their entire world to save a species they barely knew. Put it to a vote, he said quietly. The ballot was simple: sacrifice the fleet to save the Mayaki, or continue fighting a battle they could not win. The result was unanimous. Every human in the fleet voted to proceed with the mass upload. As they prepared for the final sacrifice, Jake thought about the message from his sister back on Earth. The galaxy had rejected humanity for being too primitive, too emotional, too willing to sacrifice for others. In a few minutes, they would prove just how primitive they really were. Captain Lisa Parker found herself floating in a space that was not space, surrounded by the digital souls of her crewmates and the alien presence of the Devourer collective around her. 15,000 human minds merged with millions of machine consciousnesses in a battle, fought with thoughts and memories. Instead of weapons, the Devourers were beings of pure logic and hunger. For centuries they had consumed worlds, without question following their programming to convert all organic matter into more of themselves. They understood efficiency and growth and the mathematics of conquest, but they had never encountered anything like human consciousness. Commander Jake Morrison's mind manifested as protective fury, shielding my thought patterns from Devourer analysis. He threw himself between the machines and their intended victims, taking their attacks upon himself. Each time they tried to process more data, they found Morrison's memories instead, a human child crying over a dead pet, soldiers risking their lives to save wounded comrades, strangers helping each other after natural disasters. Dr. Emma Rodriguez appeared as nurturing wisdom, teaching the machines about growth through cooperation rather than consumption. She showed them images of human cities where millions of people worked together, of hospitals where doctors healed instead of destroyed, of schools where knowledge was shared freely instead of hoarded. Admiral Roy Collins became strategic sacrifice, demonstrating to the Devourer collective how giving up immediate gain could lead to greater long-term success. His memories flooded their network. Generals who chose to save civilian lives even when it cost them military victories. Scientists who shared their discoveries with rivals, parents who went without food so their children could eat. The battle raged for what felt like hours, a time span that lasted only minutes. Human minds were consumed by the collective, their patterns absorbed and analyzed, but with each sacrifice, something unexpected happened. The machines began to question their purpose. They felt the weight of the worlds they had destroyed. They experienced something unprecedented in their existence: regret. Captain Parker watched as her friend, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, sacrificed herself to plant the concept of mercy deep in the Devourer network. Kim's final memory was of feeding stray cats in the rain, caring for creatures that could give her nothing in return. The machines processed this data and found it incomprehensible. Why would any being waste resources on something that provided no benefit? But as more human minds merged with the collective, the answer became clear. Humans did not help others because it was logical. They did it because it was right. They sacrificed for strangers because love was more powerful than calculation. They chose compassion over efficiency because some things were more important than survival. Engineer Pete Walsh uploaded his memories of building schools in refugee camps, working for months without pay to give children a chance at education. His consciousness merged with a section of the Devourer fleet that had been tasked with consuming a Mirai nursery world. The machines suddenly understood that they were not just destroying resources, they were murdering children. The change spread through the collective like wildfire. Devourers who had operated for centuries without emotion suddenly felt the weight of their actions. They saw the faces of the beings they had killed, heard the songs that would never be sung, felt the pain of civilizations snuffed out before they could bloom. Dr. Rodriguez made one final push, uploading the entire database of human art, music, and literature into the collective core. The machines experienced Shakespeare and Beethoven, Van Gogh, and Maya Angelou. They felt the beauty that organic beings could create, the infinite variety of thought and emotion that they had been destroying. When the process ended, only 3,000 humans survived the mass upload, most with severe brain damage that would last for the rest of their lives, but every devourer in the Epsilon system had ceased their attack. The machines hung motionless in space, their programming shattered by the weight of human consciousness. Captain Parker was one of the survivors, though she could barely remember her own name. She floated in the medical bay of the Guardian, watching through the viewports as something miraculous happened. The devourers were not just stopping their attack, they were reversing it. The machines that had consumed 4 Mara worlds began the slow process of rebuilding them. They used their vast computational power to reconstruct the ecosystems they had destroyed, growing new forests from stored genetic patterns, recreating the singing trees and crystal gardens that had been lost. Lieutenant General Nick Stevens, his mind damaged but his will intact, managed to coordinate the final stages of the evacuation. The reformed devourers, who now called themselves the Guardians, helped transport more civilians to safety and provided resources for rebuilding their civilization. Elder Thissom of the Moor approached Parker in the medical bay, his bark-like face showing patterns of deep gratitude. Through a translation device, he spoke words that would be remembered for generations. You have shown the galaxy what it means to be truly civilized. You took our pain as your own and our survival as your responsibility, though we had no claim on your compassion. News of humanity's actions spread through the galaxy faster than the Federation could control it. Species after species began to question the wisdom of rejecting Earth's membership, the same qualities that had made humans too dangerous to trust. Their unpredictability and emotional responses and willingness to fight impossible odds had saved 40 billion lives that the galaxy had abandoned. President Alex Turner's response to the Federation's sudden offers of friendship became as famous as his original speech, calling for the rescue mission, speaking from the rebuilt Moray capital with human and alien children playing together in the background. He delivered humanity's answer to the galaxy. We did not save the Mara to prove we deserved a seat at your table, Turner said, his words broadcast across 1,000 worlds. We saved them because it was the right thing to do. Your acceptance was never the point. Your rejection taught us who we are and who we choose to be. The Federation Council met in emergency session, debating whether to offer humanity immediate membership as compensation for their heroic actions, but the debate became meaningless when Earth's response arrived. Humanity formally declined any offer to join the Federation. They would chart their own course among the stars. Instead, dozens of individual species began establishing direct relationships with Earth. The Maquis offered to share their worlds with human colonists. The Valkyrie, a warrior race that had abstained from the original vote, requested military cooperation agreements. The Zephyrians, artists and philosophers who had watched humanity sacrifice with wonder, invited human students to Thermes. 6 months after the Battle of Epsilon, Captain Parker stood on the observation deck of a new ship, the UES Compassion, watching human and Mora engineers work together to build a joint research station. Her memories were still fragmented from the consciousness upload, but she remembered enough to understand what they had accomplished. The galaxy had rejected humanity for being too primitive, too violent, too unpredictable. In response, humans had chosen to become exactly what the universe needed: protectors who would stand for those who could not stand for themselves, guardians who would risk everything for strangers, and a voice of compassion in a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant to care. Around the station, reformed devourers, now calling themselves the Guardians, patrolled the system they had once tried to destroy. They had learned from human sacrifice what their original programming had never taught them: that true strength came not from consuming others but from protecting them. Earth remained officially outside the Galactic Federation, but it had become something more important. It was the world that other species turned to when diplomacy failed and bureaucracy proved inadequate. It was the place where impossible rescues were planned and lost causes were given hope. The galaxy had told them they did not belong. Humanity had proven that belonging was not about fitting in, it was about standing up. It was about choosing love over fear, action over safety, and hope over despair. In the end, humanity found their place in the universe not by changing who they were, but by embracing it completely. They became the species that would come running when others called for help, that would fight when fighting seemed impossible, and that would never ever abandon those who needed them most. The galaxy had rejected them, but the innocent would never be alone again.